Welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, otherwise known as Big Noon, and this is my kickoff. It is Friday, April 15th, and we're a day away from the Ohio State spring game. So much going on right now, recruiting, the whole gambit. But we're not going to talk about any of that because we never really stick to the trends. That's just not what this show's about. We're going to talk about the Big Ten championship game, which is months and months and months and months and months away, and only 2 out of 14 teams are going to make it. But Ohio State's been there plenty and had an interesting conversation on Twitter last week. Having a couple pops, start a little conversation with somebody. He has his own podcast. I come in very big, very pro Big Ten East. He has a Big Ten West slant. We get people going. We start DMing each other. We have a laugh about this. It's just how quickly we got people all tweaked on this. And I said, we should continue this conversation online. We should continue this on a show. So that's what we're doing. I want to welcome Jeffrey of Eyes on Big podcast, not Eyes on the Big Ten, not Eyes on B1G, Eyes on Big podcast. Jeffrey the Greek, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. I would just like to say, if I could make one friendly correction for the Eyes on Big podcast, we definitely don't try to have a slant to the East or West. We cover all 14 teams. That's kind of something that we try to proudly broadcast and then back up. So there's a lot of Ohio State fans that we have interactions on our podcast, and hey, what's up, Ohio State fans? I guarantee if you listen to our podcast, we'll talk about your team quite a bit.
Yeah, and I guess I should correct myself there. He took more of a stance of being more of defending the West in my besmirching of saying that the West really only deserves a participation trophy in terms of the Big Ten championship game. So we'll get to that first, and then we got a couple of other topics planned out. But, let's get to it. I mean, I've made my point very clear at various points. 8 games since switching over from leaders and legends. Big Ten East, 8-0. I've got some stats in front of me. I'm not going to confuse the conversation of throwing the stats out at first. Let's hear your opening salvo right now in terms of maybe why I'm not grasping the full picture.
Yeah, so again, follow all the teams in the East too. And if we are focusing specifically on the Big Ten championship, it's the record speaks for itself. To me, there's a more nuanced conversation as far as the entire Big Ten in general, with the Big Ten West being a big part of that. So to me, I'm hoping that's the conversation we can get into. If we want to start with the Big Ten championship, which is obviously starting in the most negative side of this, that's totally fine. The stats, I have other stats that I hope to get into a little bit here. The stats speak for themselves when it comes to the Big Ten East versus the Big Ten West in the Big Ten championship. I mean, the Big Ten East has owned the Big Ten West. I don't really know how anybody could put an argument up against that. The one thing I guess I would point out is there's really only been, 2 really bad blowouts in the game, which coincidentally was the first East versus West game played where your Buckeyes destroyed the Badgers. And then this one last year where the second half obviously just got away from Iowa with Michigan easily beating Iowa. In between that are 6 games that are pretty close. But in the end, the Big Ten East has won them. What I'm hoping kind of is that we get into more of the Big Ten West as a whole outside of the Big Ten championship.
And that's the thing. I want to come out and say there was never an argument that the Big Ten West as a division is substandard. I mean, we certainly have seen, they win bowl games. There's a lot that goes on there. My argument really came in terms of the Big Ten championship game and it really being kind of a tilted affair. And you're right, 59-0 in 2014 and 42-3 in 2021 certainly skew the scores a lot there. But I mean, if we're looking at the margin, 15, 16, and 17 were the only three games to where the margin was inside a touchdown or less. It was 3, 7, and 6. From 18 on, it's been 21, 13, 12, and 39. And the thing is, we can get lost in talking about yardage. I mean, it's not about how many yards you get in a game. It's about how many points. We don't really care about all of that. But over the course of the 8 games, the Big Ten East has about an 84 yard per game rush advantage against the West. The Big Ten East has about 115 yard per game passing advantage over the West. And then time led in terms of the 60 minutes times 8 games, the East has led 59% of all available minutes in the games. The West is about 27.2%, and we're just shy of about 14% of time when the games have been tied. So that doesn't mean that there haven't been games where the West has not been competitive. They certainly have been competitive. I can certainly remember certain games to where even against Ohio State, Northwestern goes up 10-3 against Ohio State in one of those games. Wisconsin, the year before that, has a 21-7 lead over Ohio State before Trey Sermon runs it up and down the field against them. I just think, though, that when you look at a series, and I think that 8 games in the Big Ten Championship Series is enough of a sample size to say that, under the current configuration, okay, yes, maybe some games have been close, but I don't think that it has been a highly competitive series, and that has nothing to do with East versus West in conference play, because we don't have to go that far back to see a year where Iowa dismantled Ohio State and Iowa City and had this whole new concept that Ohio State wasn't prepared to, using the tight end, and Ohio State got whacked 55-24.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of the rare Iowa fans. So, full disclosure, I played football at Iowa. My older brother played football at Iowa. I bleed black and gold. I'm not going to try to hide that at all. So that's a part of my DNA. With that being said, I'm one of the few Iowa fans that have moved on from the Iowa-Ohio State game from several years ago. But anyways, back to the Big Ten championship. So a couple points that I would like to bring up. Again, reiterating this once more. Nobody is denying that the Big Ten East has been better in the Big Ten championship than the Big Ten West. I've never said that. Kurt, my podcast partner, has never said that. I don't believe I've ever tweeted it. It's fact, because I can look at the scores and the results of the game and see it. We all can. Okay. This is a few things that I would like to point out is look at Alabama. So AKA the SEC West, and LSU versus the SEC East. I mean, even just this past year, Alabama dominated Georgia in the SEC championship. Alabama, and a couple years there with LSU, the West has dominated the East in the recent. I mean, if we went 8 years, I think it's either 8-0 or 7-1. I'm kind of doing this off the top of my head, but it has been a near cakewalk for the SEC West. But you don't hear the frame of mind that you hear from people isn't, well, the SEC East sucks. It's just all about how great the SEC West is and whoever that team in the SEC West is that came out of it. That is my take on what it should be more often when you're comparing the Big Ten East and West. The Big Ten East has been really, really good at the top, with Ohio State far and away being the team that deserves most of the credit for the Big Ten East being so good and so dominant over the Big Ten West in the championship game. So if we go back to the results, okay, so 3 of them are blowouts. 2 of the blowouts being by, and I want to correct myself. I said 2 before. I think you can easily say 3 of the results were blowouts. 2 of those blowouts were because of Ohio State. Okay. The anomaly really just happened this past December with Michigan handling Iowa. Other than that, it's been reasonably close games with Ohio State, and then Michigan State and Penn State, all right, the two other years that Ohio State didn't get in, those were close down to the second games versus the Big Ten West. Now, one thing that we argue about on Twitter that I want to bring up is, being a former football player, college football player, not that you have to be a college football player to have this take. You kind of mentioned that, like, the difference in score means nothing. It's just wins and losses. And I'm going to wholeheartedly disagree with that. I remember getting done with football games where we either killed somebody or got killed. That feels much different than a game that came down to the wire and either you won or lost. There's multiple times I could point to games where we came down to the wire and we lost, and you think we could have won that game. But even a bigger point would be when you came down to the wire and won, and you walk away thinking, whew, we were lucky to pull off the win. That means those two teams were evenly matched, that anybody could have won that game. So the score does matter. Last point that I would make is, and it's kind of going back to the SEC stuff, look at championship games across the board. The AFC and NFC championships, the Super Bowl, other conference championships. What are we talking about here? 70% of them are blowouts? I mean, I don't have hard data in front of me, but most of the time, those championship games are not that compelling. And then 30% of the time, they're amazing, and that's the ones that we remember. So if we are basically saying 3 blowouts in 8 years for the Big Ten championship, that's the norm with most of these conference championships and really a lot of football championships across the board.
Well, I'll come back to the point about, I got 2 things here about, all right, the SEC East really as of late has been Georgia, and that's it. Florida's been in the tank. I struggle. I mean, since their geography is much worse than anybody else's geography, when they had to kind of try and shoehorn Missouri and Texas A&M in, and then once Texas and Oklahoma come in, who knows what the hell the geography is going to be? But it has been a one team division for a couple years here, in my opinion. So. We're going to remember Georgia winning the national championship, even with Alabama this and Alabama that last year. I mean, Alabama was severely diminished in the championship game in terms of injuries. You don't have John Mechie, you don't have some of these guys, but I don't have the benefit of saying that I played athletics in college. I don't have a collegiate athletics background personally, but I will say is what we remember as the fan base, what we remember as the writers, what people are going to remember once the echoes of the stadium grow silent is going to be the outcome of the game. They're not going to remember, well, okay. I mean, and I have a spreadsheet in front of me. I mean, all right, we go to the 15 championship game. Michigan State scored with 27 seconds left to win that game. You go to the 16 championship game. Penn State had to score the final 14 points in the fourth quarter to win that game. Yes, those games probably, most certainly were much more evenly matched because the outcome dictates that. But is 8 games enough of a sample size to sit there and say that right now, in terms of East versus West in a 1-game vacuum, and I agree wholeheartedly, and I'm sure that most of the people watching the show are going to agree that a lot of it has been on Ohio State's back with 5 championships during that 8-game run, but that the East has been significantly stronger than the West in that one game. And that doesn't, and again, I think we've approached this from a couple of different angles. I'm looking at it in a very small 1-game-a-year series versus the entirety of the Big Ten season, because, I think that was just kind of the point of where my mind was as I was enjoying several cold beers.
That's, again, like, if I could be so bold as to say, like, there's probably not much more we can do with beating the dead horse for the Big Ten championship, because it is what it is. I mean, obviously the Big Ten championship has been owned by the East, and you kind of just alluded to it right now. I think most of that, a large majority of the reason is because of the fan base and program that you focus on, Ohio State. Ohio State has not only owned the Big Ten championship, they've owned the Big Ten. And if I could a little bit transition into, again, what you just kind of alluded to, the Big Ten season as a whole, because to me, that's where a lot of the conversation needs to happen amongst Big Ten fans. Because I don't know what else to say, but every time me and you right now, people on Twitter, in my mind, it's all kind of marketing. Okay. It's all marketing for the Big Ten, good or bad. Okay. A lot of the positive things you're reading right now with the Big Ten is the money we're going to be getting as a conference very soon when the new TV deals come out. That's the positive stuff. Okay. The negative stuff that you hear a lot of times basically is focusing on anybody that's not named Ohio State inside the Big Ten. To me, like I'm never going to be the guy that screams Big Ten like SEC fans. I think that's pretty ridiculous. But there is some pride to be had by Big Ten fans as a whole that we've got a darn good football conference. I wish I could say it's the best, but unfortunately, right now the SEC is the best. But I believe right after that, for the best football conference, is the Big Ten. And a chunk of that, which I hope we get into a little bit, is because there are strong teams in the East and there are strong teams in the West.
And that brings me into, and I could go one of two ways here. We kind of talked about them in our pre-show talk. Is it time for the Big Ten to just do away with divisions and let the good teams speak for themselves and have some different scheduling, so you're playing against, so it's not like you're playing against Ohio State and Iowa are playing twice out of every 6 years, and that Minnesota and Maryland aren't, not that I really would care about seeing a Minnesota Maryland game if we're being honest with ourselves, but to change that up, and then by doing away with divisions, then the top two teams in the conference would meet in Indianapolis or Chicago or the Moon or wherever Kevin Warren decides to put these teams. Is that the future? I mean, more so even than, I guess I'll bring up the other point. Are conference championship games even worth it? I mean, other than being a money grab, you talk about the money there. I mean, truthfully, it's kind of a money grab at this point, and we could see them go away as part of conference or CFP expansion.
Yeah, so a couple different things you brought up there. As far as Big Ten championship or conference championships being worth it, I'm not the person to answer that, but I know I can answer this confidently. If the money says it's worth it, and they ain't going away anytime soon. And my guess is the money that they earn from the TV would mean they're not going anywhere for quite some time. On the topic of divisions, okay, this was a hot button topic for several weeks there. Then it seemed to kind of cool. And I'll just say this, okay? In the Big Ten, who is the team that would benefit the most from divisions being eliminated? I think it's Ohio State. I think Ohio State would be the winner in this most of the time. And the reason I think that is because it's more of a negative for everybody else. Okay. I'm going to dog on a fan base that you're going to enjoy me dogging on, which is Michigan. I mean, after Michigan beat Iowa in the Big Ten championship, they got all puffy chesty. We're going to take on the world and everything like that. I get it. Like that's what fan bases should do when they win big games. And they talked about how stupid the divisions are. Okay. And I tried to make this point to Michigan fans, but it seemed like most of the time I was just shouting into the void or talking to a brick wall. But my whole point to them was this worked out as best as it could. You had the loss in the year to Michigan State. In order to get to the college football playoff, you had to run the table from there on out, which obviously included beating Ohio State. Now, if in some world where they had the same schedule, which they very much could have, okay, the same off-season schedule and Big Ten schedule, okay? But then instead of playing the Big Ten West champion, they would have played the second team in a non-divisional format. Do you know who you would have played, Michigan? You would have played Ohio State in a dome, with those wide receivers going crazy, not in the Snow Bowl that got played before. Any Michigan fan that was saying they would have rather played Ohio State in the I can't fathom that level of ignorance towards how this all works than that. So Ohio State would have greatly, because now Ohio State has a buffer game. Ohio State ain't losing two Big Ten games throughout the year 95% of the time. So they get a buffer game. They lose a game. They go into a Penn State and lose the whiteout game because that's an extremely tough environment for anybody in college football to win. Auburn figured that out last year. So now Ohio State loses that game. They have a loss. In many years, that might knock them out of the Big Ten championship because Penn State would have them boxed out, even if Penn State lost another game. Ohio State is almost guaranteed an appearance in the Big Ten championship every single year if we go to the non-divisional format. So if I'm your audience and I'm an Ohio State fan, 100% I want to go away from divisions. Every other team in the Big Ten is an idiot if they want to go away from divisions.
I wish you had stronger feelings about this one. You seem to be pretty neutral about the feelings here that it might benefit one team or another. I mean, I think it's important. You know, you have the Big Ten, who's among the conferences that plays 9 conference games, whereas, you know, we have just this unevenness in terms of college football, 8 versus 9. You know, I would like to, you know, I don't have a strong feeling in terms of the divisions. I mean, I don't think that we need to sit there and have a third iteration of realignment and go to East 2 versus West 2, barring them going out and expanding beyond 14 teams. And then at that point, I think that opens the door to doing it. You're just going to have teams that are just going to historically be in better positions than other ones are. But you do bring up a very valid point, though, that it does kind of create a buffer situation for Ohio State or whoever might be the power broker in the conference at that point, which again, at this point is Ohio State, in terms of not getting blocked because of having a team having a game in hand against them in the head-to-head, having that head-to-head chip in their column.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm animated because that's who I am. I don't hide how I feel and who I am. But like, if it goes to non-divisions, we'll survive. You know, like teams will survive. Here's my crazy prediction. If you look at the records of Big Ten teams, I'm kind of a last 5 years, and then I kind of use the last 10 or 15 years as kind of another data point. But for me, you know, the last 5 years recruiting cycle and then projecting forward, that's what I do a lot. So if you generally go by that and now take away the divisions and move forward, here's my bold prediction. The records moving forward of the Big Ten teams, total records, will look extremely similar without divisions as they did with divisions. I think the best programs will still win games. I think the mediocre programs will still win some games, and I think the bad programs won't hardly win again. I don't think the divisions are going to change that much. And another thing is, like when you talked about before going away from the divisions, I don't really know if it's going to change the schedule all that much as far as who these teams play. For example, we better not ever get away from Michigan and Ohio State ending the year in the game. Like so Michigan and Ohio State are always going to play, which means Michigan's always going to play Ohio State and Michigan State. The Big Ten would be kind of crazy to pull Penn State away from Michigan very often. That's a TV, you know, powerhouse type of game. So what are we really talking about here for the differences? Penn State might not play Michigan State as often. Does that move the needle or change things at all?
Well, we got the land-grant trophy. I mean, we all love the land-grant trophy.
And I could pick up your facetiousness, but like, and obviously the point is, like, there's a couple of those regional, not so well-known ones that'll change a little bit, but Iowa's still going to play Minnesota, Nebraska and Wisconsin. Those are border rivalries that have trophies. Minnesota, Wisconsin is the oldest rivalry in all of college football. Like, largely, the games that are being played throughout the year are not going to change. And another point I'd want to bring up on why, and I need people to understand this and think about this. One of the most disgusting things that could happen, and like, there's so much change has gone in college football. I don't care if I'm an old angry man yelling at the cloud. I mean this when I say we're getting way too far away from what we are as college football, and it's going to wind up biting us in the butt. I can feel it. And one of the things I'm talking about is the bragging rights that a Michigan fan or an Ohio State fan should have for the year after the game should be a 1 year long deal. The thought process of Michigan and Ohio State playing a football game and turning around and playing that football game in the next weekend makes me want to vomit in my mouth. And I just cannot believe I don't hear more chatter about that from the people that talk and bloviate all they want about getting away from the divisions. They never bring that up. So if we go away from the divisions and Michigan and Ohio State play a repeat game the week after, I better not hear it from these people, because they're not saying a word right now about it. It is a bigger deal than people are making it out to be.
Absolutely, especially after we saw no edition of the game in 2020 due to things going on in the world that we won't speak of, and just the issues there, and hearing both sides of the fan bases going nuts about it for one reason or another. So, to be continued. I think there's a lot to this whole situation. We're now closing in on 30 minutes. I promised Jeffrey the Greek I'd only keep him for 20. The computer's being a little laggy. So, Jeffrey, where can everybody find you again? Hear your excellent podcast, just so all of our viewers can connect with you.
Yeah, thanks. I am Jeffrey the Greek at Jeffrey the Greek. So you can follow me on Twitter. My podcast partner is Big Kurt. That's B1G KURT. Our podcast, the Eyes on Big podcast, it's pretty much on every single format, Apple, Stitcher, whatever you can get your hands on. So look us up there. We'll do a team preview for every team starting in probably late June, July. We usually do 2 or 3 teams per podcast. We'll do a predictions pod before the season starts. Between now and then, we've already had some fun guests. We had Braden Gall from Athlon Sports on a couple weeks ago. Dustin Schutte with Saturday Traditions, one of the friends of the pod. So we'll keep doing interviews and fun topics moving forward. And by the way, shout out to our sponsor, Amador Whiskey, great bourbon for those bourbon drinkers out there. I wholeheartedly would suggest giving it a try.
There you go. I love bourbon too, so I'll have to give that a look-see here. But Jeffrey, I want to thank you for being part of the show. I want to thank everybody out there for being part of the show as well. We'll get back to you next week with some spring game recaps and some recruiting recaps. Maybe we'll even go live so you guys can sit there and tell me what I should be talking about. But until then, have a great weekend. We'll talk to you very soon.